بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome all of you once again. I'm Human and I'll be moderating this panel, inshallah, the opening panel. Before I do and introduce our distinguished panelists and speakers and scholars, I just want to kind of give a little bit of an introduction to the topic itself. The topic really begins with the introduction to multiplexity and the notion of multiplexity. For me, the term was new when I met Dr. Rajab, in 2018. And Dr. Rajab, mashallah, has an incredible capacity to be able to synthesize a lot of information together and to also bring many disparate bodies of knowledge together and giving them terms, right, that kind of sit and summarize all of these things. So multiplexity really kind of made sense. It kind of sat with me and thinking about in myself as a psychologist and working in the field of clinical psychology, really thinking about all of the different theories and notions, and for him to kind of bring it together and talking about the asbab al-ilm, maratib al-wujud, maratib al-usul, all of these things, it just sort of, and then he gave it a term in English. It's like that really sticks. It makes sense, mashallah. And I really appreciated it, and I was happy to join the Istanbul circle, and it was quite an honor for me. The Islamic intellectual heritage, and I think we're in a Mubarak place, right? Not only do we have the scholars here who are the warathatul anbiya, the inheritors of the Islamic intellectual heritage, here to enlighten us about how to engage the world through Islamic thought and our tradition in contemporary issues. But we also have this as a living witness, a living reality, right? That this heritage existed. And what better place to have such a symposium or set of seminars and lectures than the Suleymaniya itself, which represents and brings all of this together. The Islamic intellectual heritage has the capacity to really bring together and reconcile and appropriate knowledge, different bodies of knowledge. We know this in its acceptance of one of the basic things that we read in Aqa'id, and that is the asbab al-ilm, the means or modalities of and categories of knowledge. And those were the rational, empirical, and scriptural sources of knowledge. And we have a classification and grading of all of these sources of knowledge. And there's just this incredible discourse and discussion and evaluation of knowledge according to its strength, and then appropriating it and placing it into its appropriate category, which was really incredible. I'll give a concrete demonstration about that. Try to not take too much time just to open it up. The notion of all of these things being objective. So if you have something that you see, like the brain, for example, is responsible for cognition, right? For higher order brain cognitive faculties. This is witnessed in cognitive neuroscience. There's evidence for this, empirical evidence. It cannot be rejected. Right? So that's a source of knowledge, right? And wahi is a source of knowledge, especially from the Quran, and it's clear in its meaning. That's a source of knowledge if it establishes something about reality. Then there's the discussion of what about the subjective experiences? Like we observe this, but what about dreams, right? What about somebody's dreams? And let's say, and I was asking this to Sheikh Amin, said what happens if 100 people see the same dream? Is that an objective source of knowledge? And in the Islamic tradition, with the Kalimin will say no. It's completely subjective. It cannot be falsified, and therefore it is not an objective source of knowledge. However, does that mean we negate dreams altogether and we say they're unimportant? The fact that 100 people saw the same dream means something, but that then reaches another level of engagement, and that goes from kalam to tasawwuf, right? Instead of making something into law, then we deal with it in the context of experience, right? Experiential sources and experiential fields. And this is just this incredible capacity to bridge and bring things together, whereas in my own education, and studying in American and Canadian institutions and universities, have always felt this sense of conflict where there's this tension where schools between one another are so fiercely against one another and contend with one another. And so, this is the topic. So I'll hand it over to Arsalan Hoja, who's our first speaker, who will really open up and discuss this notion of maratib, this notion of multiplexity, inshallah ta'ala. Arsalan Hoja got his bachelor's degree in the city I was born in Ankara, right? And so it's tawafuq. And he also did his master's at the University of Wisconsin, and then he did his PhD at the University of Chicago. So we have 3 out of 4 people who are sitting here actually are coming from Chicago. In Chicago, the Muslims have an expression to call Chicago, and that's called Chicago Sharif. We call it Chicago Sharif because of all of the Islamic institutions and visionary work that's being done. So mashallah, Arsalan, benefited from Chicago Sharif, and he's here. And he's taught in Malaysia at Ishtihad. He's connected to the International University of Malaysia, Islamic University of Malaysia, as well as various other think tanks, and he's also on the faculty at Ibn Khaldun University. So to hand it over to Arsalan Hoja, please enlighten us.
Thank you very much, Brother Umam.
I'm sorry.
I can use this PowerPoint. Okay, so I press this middle one, right? To proceed. Am I supposed to? Yeah, it's going. Very good. Okay, I will try to present an overview of this concept of maratib in Islamic thought in general, but in a very short time, of course, that means I cannot go into the details. However, there is something that I would like to go into detail, because you see, the source of all these ideas actually is something from where it springs, and that is the Quran. So probably I will concentrate on that a bit at the beginning to show also why Muslim thinkers come up with this concept. That is very important, I think. Now, first of all, I would like to say a few things about civilizations in general. This is something that is capturing me also, because every civilization has certain characteristics, and they receive their characteristics from certain concepts that give them the rise. So this is in Islamic civilization, for instance, just to count a few, the concepts of ilm, tawhid, nubuwah, and of course the concept that we'll be discussing these 2 days is the concept of maratib. And this gives a unity also to the Islamic civilization. There is something that I like, I usually quote this a lot from Rosenthal. So I will read this quotation to show why I am referring to this. He says that the term ilm is fairly well rendered by our knowledge into English. However, knowledge falls short of expressing all the factual and emotional contents of ilm. For ilm is one of those concepts that have dominated Islam and given Muslim civilization its distinctive shape and complexion. In fact, there is no other concept that has been operative as a determinant of Muslim civilization in all its aspects to the same extent as ilm. So just as ilm, I derive this conclusion from that, just as ilm dominates Islam and gives Muslim civilization its distinctive shape and complexion, in the same way, the concept of maratib also dominates Islamic thought and gives it its distinctive shape and complexion. Moreover, by being at a higher level, this concept, how can we translate? We use the term multiplexity, of course, to render it in English. But in thought, there is another concept that is used in English, the concept of hierarchy, as we all know. Hierarchy, if we follow what Rosenthal says, is renders fairly well the concept of maratib, but it doesn't explains everything. Therefore, that translation is really does not capture all the meanings that we mean by this concept of maratib, and this will be probably clear in our discussions. So these are the quotations that I just read from Rosenthal. So when we examine the history of Islamic thought, we can see that this mentality of maratib exists in every idea or within the foundation of every theory. It can be seen. If this concept is the foundation, then we should be able to see it in the very root of Islamic thought, which is the revelation, namely the Quran, in other words. And therefore, when we examine the Quran, we will see that there is a reference to two worlds which are subject to human knowledge, and these are expressed in the Quran as ghaib and shahada. So again, it is not so easy to translate these, but usually, as I'm sure you are familiar with, this concept of ghaib is translated as either invisible or unseen, the world unseen. But of course, the term world is not proper to use in this case because it refers to something physical. So as a result, probably realm would be maybe better rendering in this case. So these are then the two realms. Now, this distinction made by the Quran is not only a clear fact, but also dependent on the possibility of human knowledge of these two realms. This means that the maratib of ontology is already reflected on to the epistemology. Now, there is still a problem to be solved in this ontological distinction, since the Quran just makes a distinction without referring to which world is higher than the other. How do we know that it establishes this distinction on the basis of maratib? Now, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that it is very clearly, time and again, repeated in the Quran that only God knows the ghaib. As human beings, we do not know, and we have no faculty to penetrate into the ghaib. But this is a general statement. When we go further, we need some explanations about this. How do we know about the ghaib? Through the revelation, whatever is revealed to us. And, the revealed knowledge concerning the ghaib is not revealed in accordance with our curiosity. This is another thing. It is revealed in accordance with our needs. Whatever is the need is determined by the extent of the knowledge. So that means that's how much is revealed, concerning the ghaib. So then, although I don't have it, on the slides, in order to determine, which realm is higher than the other, we need, in that case, certain other verses that we have to refer. Why? Because we have knowledge about the Shahada, but we do not have the proper knowledge of the ghaib to determine which one is higher, which one is lower. Because you see, this higher, lower relatively is important to determine the maratib. Now, the first two key terms that I derive are the terms al-ula and al-akhirah. The former is referring to the ula, of course, referring to the visible or physical universe. That is our world, in other words, presently. And the latter, al-akhirah, obviously refers to the unseen realm, namely the ghaib. In fact, in many other contexts, the Quran indicates that the coming realm, namely the al-akhirah, has more goodness than the present one, the ula. In other words, the dual maratib is maintained, this dual maratib is maintained in the Quran epistemologically. So we have to pay attention to this also, within which context this distinction is made is also very important. Why? How do we know this? Because of the fact that the Quran refers to the knowability or unknowability of these realms. So the epistemological ontology refers to the division of realms on the basis of the availability of their knowledge for us. However, there are also verses that refer to multi-levels in an ontological sense also. I mean, in an ontological context. These distinctions are important, especially in the thought, in Islamic thought, to make this distinction. And we have to, because maratib actually continues in all of these areas. However, there are also verses that refer to multi-levels, as I said, in the ontological sense also. For instance, we can consider these two verses. It is God who has created the heavens and the earth and everything in between in 6 days. This heavens, earth, and in between is repeated many times in the Quran. But we have to pay attention to the context. I will try to make this distinction a bit later. And another one, we have not created the heavens and the earth and everything in between without a purpose. So again, this is, ontological. The above two verses not only refers to the realms mentioned earlier, the ghaib and the shahada, but it introduces another one, a third one in between. So this should be taken into consideration in that case. So what is in between? Are we going to put it in the ghaib or in the shahada? So this will probably need more analysis. So the above two verses not only refers to the realms mentioned as the realm and physical realm, unseen realm and the physical realm, but also to all other realms in between. To all other realms in between. So, but this time, instead of using the terms ghaib and shahada, it is the terms heavens and the earth is used. Heavens and the earth. So it is interesting because although the earth is used in singular, the term heavens is used in plural. So that means there must be a multi-levels in the ghaib. So this can be interpreted as one physical universe and many unseen realms. Or universes can also be used because universe does not have to be something physical. It could be something non-physical also. Now, in order to systematize, I would like to draw your attention to what I'll be doing also, this systematization. As you know, the Quran is not a book of science or philosophy, and therefore it does not introduce its concepts in a systematic order as we want it in sciences and philosophy. It has its own system. That is something different. And usually I express that system as the tabligh method, because this is something different. That's not our concern. Our concern is how we can systematize it so that we can utilize it as a guide in philosophy and in sciences. And that is what our previous scholars, thinkers have done. Okay. So like Al-Ghazali, for example, simply, refers to God as he is in himself. That is another ghaib, expressed with an all-encompassing concept of that in Islamic thought, which is untranslatable into English. Of course, in philosophy, we use the term essence for it. Essence, we use essence. What about mahiyya, right? So that you cannot translate as essence. It doesn't mean, because essence means something, mental, and its reality is questionable also. But that is personal, something as a real being. It refers to that. And then, of course, another term. There are many terms introduced. I will not go at the moment into those like alam al-lahut, these in order to refer to the divine realm, as we may translate. Now, since the Quran, as I said, is not a philosophy book, what we will do, we'll try to convert them into philosophical terminology. I will try to do that from time to time. But at the moment, maybe I will not go into the details. So when we examine the Quran, we may find clue for further realms also. This is another interesting thing. Like ma fis samawati wa ma fil ardi wa ma baynahuma wa ma tahta ath-thara. Another world is introduced here, another realm, or in other words. So the regular translations, I checked a few translations. This is the one. To him belongs whatever is in the heavens and on the earth, and whatever is in between, and whatever is underground. I thought this would be probably the closest translation. They have different translations also, but at least, this gives us another concept. So how are we going to situate ma tahta ath-thara in this scheme? I will try to do something and then see if you will agree with me or not. So I don't know if my text and this is following exactly the same one, probably the same. 2-3 dakika mı kaldı? Eyvah. So I have to go faster. So what I did, I tried to determine the context of these discussions or these verses in the Quran. The first one is epistemological, as I mentioned it, ghaib and shahada. And the second context is ontological, namely making classification of the realms. And the third one is cosmological. So as you can see, the ontology is reflected to all other areas. And the third one is concerning about the purpose. There is another verse not created for a certain purpose, and so on. So then, based on this, I try to systematize it. Let me see. These are the context. I think these are the context. Let me see. The next one is the systematization. Number one, the unseen realm, namely ghaib, refers to which the term samawat refers. This is my interpretation. Okay. And the second one, the unseen realm leading to the unseen world. Ma baynahuma is my interpretation. This is also ghaib. Wa ma baynahuma, that the Quran says. But we have to be careful, when you say something is in between two things, that means one aspect looks the first one, second looks to the other one. So that means the wama baynahuma refers to both the ghaib and the shahada. So that means it has a window to us. So if we speak in the epistemological sense, in that case, we should be able to gain some knowledge of this wama baynahuma. This is open to us, but its method is different. So this is the problem, you see. Its method is not like the ones that we would be using in sciences. So as you can see, the maratib in the ontology necessarily leads to epistemology and methodology. It is something necessary. You have to develop this. And that is what Muslims have done actually in the past. And finally, the other two words also, وَمَا تَحْتَ الثَّرَى, although the term refers to the underground, it is actually above the ground. Because you see, this is again a philosophical interpretation. It's not regular in tafsirs. Probably, I don't know if they would say something like this. Maybe we need to check Fakhruddin Razi, see what he's trying to say. You know why? Because, in the Quran, it is very clear that this world, our world, is the end point of the maratib. That means there is nothing below it anymore. It ends. Why? Because from this, this is very much clear, in the Quran also. I am not speculating wildly. That means independently of the Quran, we cannot speculate. Allahu yabda'ul khalqa thumma yu'iduhu thumma ilayhi turja'un. This is very clear, in this verse. You went into the earth, then you return. So that means this is the end. That return is ma tahta thara. It refers to that. So that means when we look from the ma'ad, in other words, from the return aspect, it will seem as if it is under the ground because we are on this side. As you know, above, below, these are relative concepts. It depends from which perspective you look to see this. So as a result, then, there is one ghaib, wama baynahuma, which is also ghaib, but open to us. What is closer to us is ma tahta thara. And then we are at the below. So these four levels, definitely, we can extract from the Quran. So based on this, Muslims developed their, here you can see, I introduce also this kalam, but probably I will just have to pass on this because there is anyway reference to the methodology. This is extremely important because the first ghaib, maybe we can, refer to it as absolute ghaib. Namely, alam al-lahut, or the divine realm, that, as you know, in the hadith also, we are encouraged not to speculate or make tafakkur, in other words, about his that, but rather to the af'al. So that means its methodology is no interpretation except whatever is said in the Quran, in the revelation, and the explanations provided by the Prophet ﷺ. And that's it. The second one, وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, because we are coming to this closer to us, then we need the guidance of the revelation, maybe some speculations allowed, but not rational speculation. Then you have the spiritual content, so this is important. Now, when I say spiritual, this is not developed in the Western tradition. This exists only in Islamic tradition, and usually Muslim philosophers refer to these as the lata'if, faculties of spiritual experience. These must be actively used to get the knowledge of this realm. So this is possible in a limited sense. But when we come closer to the Shahada, our knowledge of the ghaib will increase until we reach the Shahada, our physical universe. That means we can know everything concerning this world, depending on, of course, how much we work and our knowledge. It doesn't mean that we already know everything, but it is open for speculation, rational methodology, and everything. That is the regular sciences. Now, based on this, the Muslim scholars, they developed, for example, Al-Farabi. I have the quotation here, you can see. The maratib, of course, from the higher regions to the lower regions is explained with the guidance of the Quran. It is taken from the Quran, actually. But they need to, explain it in detail, enrich the explanation. And this enrichment, he is using the Aristotelian Neoplatonic, content. So he is applying that. But what is interesting with regard to Al-Farabi is that he's applying this to the society also, human society. So everybody knows that. So let me continue in that case. And okay, in 1 minute, if you allow me, I'll just show the slides. I cannot explain. The maratib I said that Al-Farabi is using is also the same as Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina is more systematic. That's why I tried to present it on this table. All the way from the necessary existent, things follow in levels, coming all the way here, as you can see, to our physical universe. Then the return starts. They also have this return. Al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad, Ibn Sina's works, we can see this chapter. So another one, maybe, let's see. This Ottoman scholar in the Ottoman period, this continued. Ahmed Avni Konuk is one that, he gives this maratib in this sense. La ta'ayyun, ta'ayyun awwal, ta'ayyun thani, martabay arwah, and martabay mithal, alamul mithal, in other words, and martabay shahadat, and human perfection, again, you see, comes to the society. So what is interesting is that this cosmological maratib is reflected onto the society. I had some interesting, actually, quotations from them, but I suppose I will have to stop here. Just I will show you, Mullah Sadra is very interesting also. He gives us the maratib in the sociological sense, how it is, especially human beings are also leveled in this way. And finally, I would like to show all of this as a summary on my table here. You can see from ontology, epistemology, truth, society, and methodology. I'll just leave it for you to reflect upon. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I passed, it was my time limit.
No, I apologize. It's so enriching and so relevant, and I wish we have more time that we could actually go through it and reflect. Unfortunately, we just have such a tight schedule. But you're whetting everybody's appetites to actually read the works and to learn more, inshallah. So at this point, we'll go on to Zoom in order to present the next speaker, Tahsin Hoja. He will be presenting on social ontology from the classical perspective. Tahsin Hoja is a professor in the Department of Philosophy at the May 29th University, 29 Mayıs Üniversitesi, and he received his PhD from My German is like non-existent, so I can't pronounce this. Freie University, Berlin, in Usul al-Fiqh and philosophy. And he's been associated with ISAM as a research professor and senior fellow and executive board member. He was a visiting professor as well at Goethe University and University of Vienna, and his main interests are focused on Usul al-Fiqh, Islamic intellectual history, focusing on the tradition of Ma Wara Nahr, the ulama from the Transoxania, and the Ottoman period. Quranic studies, Ottoman European relations, Ottoman influences on the modern West, German idealism, hermeneutics, as well as various themes of philosophy such as language, knowledge, ethics, and society. Without further ado, I'd like Tahsin Hoja to enlighten us all, inshallah.
Efendim çok teşekkür ediyorum. Hepinizi hürmetle selamlıyorum. Seste herhangi bir sorun var mıdır acaba? Tamam, başlıyorum o zaman.
Buyurun.
Benim üzerinde duracağım mevzu klasik perspektiften sosyal ontoloji. Öncelikle şunun altını çizmemiz gerekir. Sosyal ontolojinin mevzusu sosyal varlık, social being de diyorlar. Ben daha çok içtimai varlık tabirini kullanacağım. İçtimai varlık sosyal ontolojinin konusu ve içtimai varlığın mahiyeti nedir? Bu soru, esas sorumuz bu. Burada tabii ki günümüzde sosyal ontoloji ile alakalı özellikle Batı dünyasında çok fazla çalışma var. Bu çalışmalar arasında özellikle son zamanlarda sosyal ontoloji alanını daha da canlandıran ve tayin edici bir yer edinen John Searle'ın Construction of Social Reality isimli eseri ve onun etrafında daha sonra çok önemli çalışmalar yapıldı. Ama burada önemli sorunlar var. O sorunların neler olduğunu tabii ki burada fazlaca konuşamayız. Benim esas üzerinde durmak istediğim mesele bizim sosyal ontoloji veya toplumsal olanı müzakere ederken genellikle kendimizin toplum olarak var olduğunu ihmal ediyor olmamız. Yani Müslümanlar olarak biz şu anda da toplum olarak yaşadığımızı ihmal ediyoruz ve kendimizi farklı farklı sebeplerle yok sayarak ya çok tarihe gidiyoruz, geçmişte bir vakitler yaşamış olan bir İslam toplumunun nasıl var olduğunu konuşuyoruz veya Batı dünyasındaki mevcut toplumu İslam toplumunun bir tür geleceği olarak düşünerek Batı toplumlarına göre nerede eksiklerimiz olduğunu tartışıyoruz. Birisine çok kabaca Seleficilik, öbürüne modernizm diye isim verebiliriz. Burada araya kaynayan, dikkate alınmayan esas şu anda Müslümanların yerkürede mevcut olduğu ve Müslümanların şu anda toplum oluşturarak varlıklarını sürdürdükleri gerçeği. Dolayısıyla bizim sosyal ontoloji ile alakalı soruyu ve soruşturmayı nereden başlatacağımız ile alakalı şunu söylememiz gerekiyor. Şu anda neredeysek orada. Şu anda yerküre üzerinde 2 milyara yakın Müslüman var ve Müslümanlar şu veya bu şekilde, şöyle veya böyle toplumlar olarak yaşıyorlar. Tabii bunu bir kenara bunu dikkate alarak şimdi bazı hususları biraz daha netleştirmek istiyorum. Şunu söyleyebiliriz, yani gerekçelerini belki daha uzun konuşmak lazım ama şunu söyleyebiliriz, artık yer küre üzerinde modernleşme ve batılılaşma bitti. Batılılaşmanın bittiğini bittiğini söylemek demek aslında şu anda Batı toplumları insanlığın geleceğini temsil etmiyor demek. Bunu dikkate aldığımızda şunu söyleyebiliriz. Batılılaşmanın bittiği şartlarda toplumsal varlığın mahiyetini konuşmak, toplum olarak var olmanın ön şartları, muhtevası ve sonuçlarını araştırmak şu anda bizim yapmamız gereken şey. Özellikle mevcut durumda karşı karşıya kaldığımız en esaslı sorun, fark etmiyor, batılı, doğulu, güneyli, kuzeyli bütün toplumların karşı karşıya kaldığı en önemli sorun hakikat ile irtibatın koparılması. Hakikat ile irtibatın koparılmasının en önemli sebeplerinden birisi, olanın kendisine bağlı olarak gerçekleştiği düzenin bu düzene içkin bir esastan kaynaklandığı, dolayısıyla oluşta bir düzenin teşekkülünün varlığa içkin güç tarafından zorunlu olarak sağlandığı varsayımı oldu ve bu hakikati bu anda veya geçmişte değil, olacak olanda görmeye sevk etti. Hakikatin olacak olanda aranması, olacak olanı insan fiillerine bağlayan bir tavırla bir araya getirildiğinde, hakikatin insanlar tarafından icat edileceği ve hiçbir icadında nihai olamayacağına bağlı olarak insanların hakikate hiçbir zaman ulaşamayacakları gibi bir düşünceyi anlamlı hale getirdi. Postmodern ve post-truth hakikat sonrası söylemleri tam da bunu dile getirir. İslam dünyası ve özellikle sömürgeleştirilmiş bölgelerde yaşayan insanlar için hakikat, hep sömürgeci ülkelerin hayatları, kültürleri ve her türlü söylemleri olarak kurgulandığı için uzun süre, belki birçokları için hala bir hakikat sorunuyla karşı karşıya olduğumuz düşünülmedi. Bizim yaşadığımız, yani İslam dünyası söz konusu olduğunda burada. Ancak bugün yerkürede ortaya çıkan ve adını sürekli kriz hali veya kriz halinin sürekli hale gelmesi olarak isimlendireceğimiz durum ile birlikte Müslümanlar da diğer insanlarıyla aynı sorunlarla karşı karşıya olduklarını, herhangi batılı bir ülkenin hayat düzenini elde etmenin sorunları çözmek için yeterli olmadığını, bu hayat düzeninin sorunun çözümü değil kaynağı olduğunu fark ettiler. Bu durumda yapılması gereken nedir? Batılıları yerküre üzerinde ortaya çıkan sorunların müsebbibi olarak görmek ve mahkum etmek sorunları çözmüyor. Bu durumda yapılması gereken, durumdan vazife çıkararak, bütün imkanları kullanarak, bütün insanlarla birlikte bütün insanlığın sorunlarını çözmeye yönelmek olarak durmaktadır. Bütün imkanların neler olduğunu araştırmak söz konusu olduğunda ilk olarak akla gelen husus, şimdiye kadar belirli bir cihetten bilginin konusu olmakla birlikte bilgi kaynağı olarak kabul etmeyen, yani kendimizi bilginin konusu olmakla birlikte bilginin kaynağı olarak kabul etmeyen tavrı terk ederek kendini tanımaya ve kendi varlığını sorun ve sorunlu olarak görmek yerine kendi varlığını keşfetme, muhafaza ve inkişaf ettirmeyi istihdaf eden bir yönelişle sorunları bu cihetten kavrayarak soruları sormak ve soruşturmak olmaktadır. Bunun anlamı, bugün Müslümanların hakiki olarak sosyal bilimleri yapmaya başlamaları ve bunu da toplumun veya toplumsal varlığın mahiyetiyle ilgili soruyu şimdiye kadar sorulmuş soruların ve verilmiş olan cevapların farkında olmakla birlikte sanki ilk defa soruyormuş gibi sormak ve ancak bundan sonra insanlığın bu alandaki birikiminden istifadeye yönelmek olacaktır. Bu çerçevede modern sosyal ontolojiler kadar klasik İslam düşüncesindeki sosyal ontolojik yaklaşımlar yine ve yeniden ele alınarak günümüzde karşı karşıya kalınan toplumsal varlığı tehdit eden sorunları kavramak, teşhis etmek ve hal yolları geliştirmeye çalışmak önem arz etmektedir. Bu çerçevede şu kadarını hemen söyleyebilirim. Modern sosyal ontolojiler arasında özellikle benim de çok ilgilendiğim John Searle'ün yaklaşımı çok çok önemli. Fakat John Searle'ün yaklaşımında deklaratif ifadelerin, yani toplumsal varlığı deklaratif ifadelerin bir fonksiyonu olarak gören yaklaşım aslında nihai olarak bir yani modern dünyada tayin edici konumda olan voluntarizmin yeni hali olarak gözüküyor. Dolayısıyla voluntarizmin yeni hali olduğu için de yani toplumsal varlığı mahiyetine uygun bir şekilde kavrama konusunda eksik kalıyor. Şimdilik o kadarını söyleyeyim. Şimdi bizim öncelikli olarak demek ki üzerinde durmamız gereken husus Müslümanların şu anda da toplum olarak var oldukları ve her şeye rağmen yani çok farklı şekillerde değerlendirilse de yani o oryantalist bakış açısıyla kurgulanmanın ötesinde kendi hakikati olan, kendi içerisinde hakikatini taşıyan toplumlar olarak Müslümanlar mevcut. Müslümanların kusursuz olduğu, hiçbir eksiklerinin olmadığı gibi bir şeyi kimse iddia edemez zaten. Böyle bir şey söz konusu değil. Ama Müslümanların varlığının kendi başına bir kusur olduğunu da kimse iddia edemez. O zaman şunu söylememiz lazım. Müslümanlar hala varsa ve varlıklarını muhafaza ediyorlarsa her şeye rağmen demek ki burada bütün şeylere direnen bir boyut var ve bu boyutun biz hakikatle irtibat ciheti olduğunu dikkate almamız lazım. Bunu her şeyden önce bunu varsayarak, bunu dikkate alarak mevcut yaşayan İslam toplumlarını dikkate aldığımızda bunun önümüze ne gibi imkanlar çıkaracağına şimdiden hemen karar veremeyiz. Ama şunu ifade edeyim. Öncelikle içtimai varlığı oluşturan mevcudatın her biri birden fazla insanın tekil niyetleri ve hareketlerinin ötesinde bir bütünlük teşkil eder. Şunu ifade edeyim. Bundan sonra klasik perspektifi dikkate alarak modern sosyal ontolojileri de değerlendirerek öyle söyleyeyim ifade etmeye çalıştığım belki bir kitabın 9 ayrı bölümünü oluşturacak 9 ayrı tez burada paylaştığım bu 9 ayrı tezi ana hatlarıyla şerh ederek ben sunumumu tamamlayayım. İçtimai varlığı oluşturan mevcudatın her biri birden fazla insanın tekil niyetleri ve hareketlerinin ötesinde bir bütünlük teşkil eder. Bu bütün parçası olan niyetlere ve hareketlere kendi başlarında olduğunda sahip olmadıkları bir mana vererek onları daha farklı bir varlığın parçası haline getirir. İçtimai mevcudatın her birisi de daha üst bir bütünün parçası olarak farklı bir mana kazanarak kendi başına sahip olmadığı bir mana kazanır. Sosyal ontolojinin meselesi bu bütünlerin nasıl teşekkül ettiğidir. Faydası, klasik dille ifade edecek olursak, faydası içtimai varlığı anlamak ve açıklamak, gayesi ise mevcudu tahkim ederek inkişaf ettirmenin makul yollarını keşfetmektir. Bununla alakalı olarak öncelikli olarak ilk tezimi hemen ifade edeyim. İlk tez nedir? Vücut, tayin ve zuhur demektir. Tek tek insanlar biyolojik olarak mevcut olduğu gibi her bir insanın kendi iç dünyası, duyguları ve duyumları da mevcuttur. Klasik dilin ifadesiyle insanda cismani, nebati, hayvani ve insani ruh bir bütün oluşturur. İnsan natık canlıdır. İnsan bütün bu unsurların beraberliğinde bulunur. Buradaki bulunma hem şuur hali olarak kendini bulma hem de başkaları tarafından bulunmayı ihtiva eder. Vücut ve vicdan bu bulunuş ve buluştur. İkinci tezimiz tahayyün ve zuhur bir mahalde gerçekleşir. İçtimai olanın tahayyün ve zuhur mahalli insanlar arasıdır. Bu insanlar arasını İngilizce hani intersubjektivite diyoruz ya, intersubjektif. Bu insanlar arası, içtimai olanın varlığının gerekli şartı insanlardır. Ancak insanların varlığı tek başına içtimai olanı temin edemez. İnsanlar arası ahitler üzerinden gerçekleşir. Ahitler de zihni ve harici olabilir. Zihni ahitler harici olanlarla da irtibatlı olarak hafıza üzerinden muhafaza edilir. Hafıza esas itibariyle bireysel olmakla birlikte ahdi harici üzerinden toplumsal bir boyut da kazanır. Ahdi harici bir cihetten fiziki dünya ile alakalı olsa da en önemli vasatı dildir. Dil, ahdi hariciyi taşıyan en önemli muhafazadır, mahfazadır. Üçüncü tez, toplumsal olanın taayyünü ve zuhurunun mahiyeti ve keyfiyeti sosyal ontolojinin mevzusunu teşkil eder. Bu kısaca verili durumun ötesine geçerek bir tecrit yoluyla taayyün ve zuhuru ele almak anlamına gelir. Bu da tarihi ve sistematik cihetten yapılabilir. Dilin mahiyetini tarihi olarak ele almak mümkün değildir. Çünkü dil esas itibariyle tamamen canlı olan bir şeydir. Bizim o yazılı olarak gördüğümüz şey dil değil, dilin bir tür kaydıdır, yazıdır adı üstünde. Dil konuşmadan ibarettir esas itibariyle. Dolayısıyla dilin aslında kendisi vardır. Dilin mahiyeti tarihte bulunamaz. Din söz konusu olduğunda, dinin taayyün ve zuhuru söz konusu olduğunda durum farklılık arz eder. Onu ayrı konuşmak lazım. Toplumsal olan en kamil, dördüncü tez, toplumsal olan en kamil şekliyle insanların hayatında zuhur etse de bitkiler ve canlılarda da tahakkuk etmektedir. Bir araya gelerek bir bütün olarak hareket etmek diğer canlılarda da söz konusudur. Karıncalar ve arılar bunun en önemli misalleridir. Bunu dikkate aldığımızda yani toplumsal olan en kamil şekliyle gerçekten de insanların hayatında zuhur ediyor. Ama toplumsallık insana özgü bir şey değil. Beşinci teze geçiyoruz buradan. Bitkiler ve canlılarda toplumsallık tabii ve fıtri iken insanlarda toplumsallık tabii ve fıtri olan ile şu veya bu oranda irtibatlı olmakla birlikte şu veya bu oranda iradi ve aynı zamanda vaz'idir. Fıtri ve tabii olanın mı yoksa iradi ve vaz'i olanın mı belirleyici olduğu toplumlar arasındaki farkların esasını teşkil eder ki özellikle İbn Haldun'un toplumu ele alırken yaklaşımı bu yönden çok önemlidir. O diyelim işte bedevi toplumlara fıtri olana daha yakın, medeni olan, hadari olanı da vaz'i olana daha yakın olarak kavrar ve o çerçevede ele alır. Bitkiler ve hayvanlarda toplumsallık tabii ve fıtridir demek, onların beraberliklerinin türe özgü olduğu ve yerkürenin hemen her tarafında 3 aşağı 5 yukarı aynı olması. Bütün kediler, ben onu öyle söylüyorum, Türkçe miyavlar. Bütün martılar çocuklarını bizim martılar gibi yetiştirirler. Bütün arılar, bütün karıncalar diye devam edebiliriz. İçtimai insanideki vaz'iliğin temellerini dil ve din oluşturur. Dil ve din de vaz'idir. Dil ve din insan toplumlarında ortaya çıkan, tahayyün eden şeylerin esasını teşkil eder. Ama zaman içerisinde içtimai varlık vaz'iliğin sağladığı imkanlara bağlı olarak asıllarla olan irtibatını zayıflatabilir, hatta kopararak tamamen bağımsız bir görüntü kazanabilir ki özellikle günümüzde ki insanlığın hali tam da bu, yani o hakikatle yani dil ve dinle irtibatını koparıp bağımsız bir varlık olduğu görüntüsü. Tabii insanları aldatan esaslı bir taraf burası. Altıncı tez, insanların birlikte yaşamak mecburiyeti meselenin fıtri boyutunu işaret ederken bunun muntazam ve mürettep bir hal alması vaz'iliği ile alakalıdır. İnsanların birlikte yaşama mecburiyeti insan yavrusunun biyolojik ve psikolojik özellikleriyle doğrudan alakalıdır. İnsan yavrusu canlılar arasında hemcinslerinin himayesine en fazla ve en uzun süre bağımlı olanıdır. Ayrıca insan yavrusu canlı olarak dünyaya gelir ve adım adım beşer ve insan haline gelir. Beşer ve insan haline gelmesi için doğduğu toplumun dili, dini ve kültürünü üstlenmesi yoluyla gerçekleşir. Dil, din ve kültür tabii olmayıp vaz'idir. 7. tezimiz vaz'ilik keyfilik değildir. Vaz'iliğin insanlar arası tahakkukuna muvazaa denilir. Muvazanın esasını ahd-i zihni veya ahd-i harici teşkil eder. Ahd-i zihni ve haricinin içtimai bir boyut kazanabilmesi için cem edici bir cihetinin bulunması gerekir. Yani bir vahdet ciheti. Cem edici cihet, yani ciheti vahde, aidiyet üzerinden sağlanır. Aidiyet ki günümüzde bunu daha çok commitment, yani bağlılık, taahhüt, söz, vaat vesaire de isimlendiriliyor. Aidiyet yani commitment olarak da isimlendirilen aidiyet esas itibariyle toplumların ciheti vahdesini teşkil eder. Aidiyet özünde normatiftir. Mükellefiyetler içerir. İnsanlar arasının aidiyet üzerinden tahakkuku olan ile olması gereken arasında geçişin sağlanmasıyla mümkün. İnsanlar genel olarak bir toplum içine doğdukları için ister istemez daha önce ortaya çıkmış olan taahhütleri farkında olarak veya olmayarak üstlenirler. Yeni yetişen nesillerin daha önce ortaya çıkmış, tayin etmiş olan içtimai unsurları üstlenmeleri sürecine ülfet veya sosyalleşme denir. Sosyal ontolojik açıdan mesele, sosyalleşme öncesinde içtimai unsurların tayin sürecini anlamak ve açıklamaktır. Mevcut bir toplumdaki içtimaiyat unsurlarının birbirleriyle yatay ve dikey ilişkiler, sosyolojinin, fertlerin sosyalleşme süreci, sosyal psikolojinin konusudur. İçtimai unsurların tayin süreci, vaz ve muvazanın tahakkuk süreci üzerinden kavranabilir. 8. tez. Muvaza, hakiki manasıyla tayin edeni temyiz ederek ona bir ad koymak, tayin etmektir. Doğan bir çocuğa ad koymak bunun en bariz misalidir. Ad koymak bir dil içinde ve dilin kurallarına bağlı olarak mümkündür ki özellikle John Searle'ın bütün sosyal ontolojinin esasında özellikle onun institutional facts dediği şeyin dille olan irtibatı, o analizlerini burada önemli bir katkı olarak zikredebiliriz. Dilin kendisi fertleri ve hatta toplumları önceler, onların fert ve toplum olarak teşekkülü ve muhafazasını mümkün kılar. Ki bunu da özellikle Heidegger'in dille alakalı olarak dil-dünya ilişkisini ele alırken ortaya koyduğu yaklaşımdan bu çerçevede ciddi şekilde istifade edilebilir. Dil toplumun intersubjektif mahallidir. İçtimai olan, maruf olan demektir ve maruf insanlar arasında hayrı yani insanı muhafaza üzerinden tayin ederek kendisini kanıtlamış söz ve iş birliklerinin adıdır. Marufun dile getirilmiş haline örf denilir. Örf ilimlerde terimleri, ıstılahları ve onların mesele halletme sürecinde kullanma şeklini ifade eder. Toplumsal hayatta örf, içtimai müesseseleri ve onların işleyiş kurallarını, kavaidini ifade eder ki buna biz müessese veya kurum diyoruz zaten. Klasik dilimizde örfi şer'i ayrımı bu yönden önem arz etmektedir. Örfi kurallar devletin kurallarını ve kurumlarını ifade ettiği gibi örf ve adetler isimlendirmesi de toplumsal müesseseleri isimlendirir. 9. ve son tezim. İnsanların birlikte yaşamaları yani söz ve işbirliği bizzat bir tayin olduğu gibi, tabi burada neyin tayin ettiği sorusu çok çok önemli. Hak ve hakikatin bir tayini, bütün bir varlığı kısaca yani zatın isimlerinin, Cenab-ı Hakk'ın isimlerinin ve fiillerinin tayini olduğunu dikkate alacak olursak, tecellisi olduğunu dikkate alarak bakarsak yani birçok şey daha kolayca anlaşılabilir. Bütün bunların hakikatle irtibatı. İnsanların birlikte yaşamaları yani söz ve işbirliği bizzat bir tayin olduğu gibi tayin edenin temyiz edilerek ona bir ad konulması üzerinden varlık kazandıktan sonra onun varlığının dikkate alınması üzerinden yeni tayinler ve tayinlerin yeni temyizleri ve yeni tayinler gerçekleşir ki işte toplumsal hayatı çok katmanlı bir şekilde ele almak demek bu demek zaten. Bütün bu tahayyünler aslında havası selime, haber, sem ve nazar üzerinden ele alınabilir. Sem dediğimizde tabii ilk akla gelen dil, din ve kültürdür. Bütün bunları dikkate aldığımızda yani bizim o klasik metinlerde gördüğümüz epistemolojinin işte bilgi kaynağı üçtür. Havası selime, haber, sadık haber ve nazar veya akıl ayrımını dikkate aldığımızda bunlar birbirlerini tamamlayan, birlikte dikkate alındığında bizi hakikat ve irtibatlı olarak meselelere yaklaşmayı mümkün kılar demek lazım. Evet, umarım zaman sınırını zorlamamışımdır. Dikkatlice dinlediğiniz için teşekkür ediyorum. Evet.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Sağ olsun hocam. Ağzınıza sağlık. I'll try to do a brief synopsis, as difficult as this is, because the complexity of the topic he presents is quite a challenging one to synthesize. But Dr. Tahsin Hoja is talking about social existence, the reality of social existence. And Muslims for a long time have neglected social existence. And that is starting to change, that Muslims are starting to think about their social realities and their social existence and social ontology. And in order to do this, he says that Western civilization, Western thought has not provided sufficiency in order to do that. And it's starting to, we're starting to kind of look deeper. And where can we look deeper? We can look into the classical texts, into classical Islamic literature, in order to be able to address this issue of what is human social reality. In the social reality, he says that it's important to be able to distinguish between the notion of being and knowing, in order to be able to answer this question. He then goes through the series of chapter titles for his book on this, drawing from classical traditions in which he says that he's relying upon the classical classification of the sources of knowledge, which I had mentioned in my introduction, rational, empirical, and scriptural, or reports/scriptural. He presents the chapter titles, which I'll just kind of list really quickly. One of them was existence, specification, and expression. The second one was specification and expression, which he says is tied to location. The third is specification, expression, which is essentially the subject matter of social ontology. The fourth is that that the social has perfected specification in the life of people and in the reality, and has a reality in animals and in the plant world. He says that sociability is fitri, natural to the animals, but it also has a institutional manifestation in human beings. And then the rest of the chapters he talks about is the role on language. Thank you, Hojam, for this wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it. And we'll hope that you'll stick around for the Q&A so that we can follow up with any clarifications, inshallah. Next, we'll go to Qayyim Naoki Yamamoto Hoja. He is a professor or former professor at Ibn Khaldun University, now at Marmara University, correct, Qayyim Hoja? And he did his PhD in Japan, and I was introduced to him in the Istanbul Circle, and he does a lot of interesting work. Particularly, he focuses on the parallels found in Futuwa, or Islamic chivalry, and Japanese constructs, classical constructs. And today he'll be talking about the diversity of Tao and the practice of perfection, a multi-layered understanding of the world in Chinese Islamic thought. And mashallah, he's the most fashionable person amongst us probably in the room. And, I guess we got to figure out where to get those kinds of jubbas that he's wearing. Samurai jubba. He also does tea making ceremonies here at the Suleymaniye as well every now and then, which is itself an incredible thing and display. Or maybe we'll get an opportunity to sit in one of those one day, inshallah. تفضل.
ekran açabilir misiniz? Point. Oh. Maşallah. Oh. Tamam, hadi bismillah. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to such an interesting workshop. And I know if I were in a costume like this, I look like a character from Kung Fu Panda. You know Kung Fu Panda biliyor musunuz? Böyle Kung Fu yapan panda yani. But actually, like, you know, this clothes is a really good example that why critically thinking about the modern social science is important. Because right now in Japan, I think, you know, just it's really amazing. 30 years ago, the many people still wearing this kimono, like Japanese clothes. But now only like, you know, less than 1% of persons wearing this right now. And usually now people are going like, you know, H&M or like Zara, or if you want to buy the furniture, they go to IKEA, like IKEA, and you know, they're losing their identity, and they are naively accepting this fact. And I became Muslim like 12 years ago, and after that I came to Istanbul, and I studied educational institute called ISAR, and that is the first time I heard this concept of the maratib. And it was really quite shocking for me, because before that, you know, when I became Muslim, I thought, you know, becoming Muslim is like, you know, wearing a jubba, or like wearing, you know, the turban, or like eating, I don't know, like so many like exotic clothes. But that, you know, the ISAR, the teacher teaching that how actually this multiple approach, not only the, you know, the sciences, but society is one of the most powerful weapon of the Islamic civilization. And I travel also like Indonesia or Malaysia or the Pakistan. And actually I found out, you know, in Japan, even though it's like, you know, freaking humid country, the people are like torturing themselves wearing the suits, like Western suits. But if they go to Malaysia, they're wearing batik. And if I go to Pakistan, they're wearing their own clothes. And I found out, you know, the Muslim community is the, how can I say, the only community who are still resisting this one layered, like in Western sciences, not only like intellectual level, but also from the cultural level or the sociological level. And, you know, this is, you know, and these experiences really helped me to establish my own, like, you know, the, how can I say, intellectual Muslim identity. And this is how I started my project in Istanbul. Right now, you know, what I'm doing in Istanbul is that, you know, first of all, you know, I'm inviting lots, not lots of, you know, actually Japanese Muslims are super minority, but, you know, some of my Japanese students, Muslim converts to Istanbul to expose to this narrative society. That, you know, actually, like, you know, if we travel to Istanbul, we can see lots of like historical and sociological example of this, you know, open civilization. And also, like, you know, I established this Sakura Japanese Studies Center. I don't know the official title, but in Ibn Khaldun University. And in the center, I'm doing lots of comparative studies, like between the Islamic civilization and also the Asian civilization or the Japanese culture. And also, I'm one of my new project is this the Suleymaniye Japanese tea ceremony. And this Japanese tea ceremony is not only like for serving tea, but this is our traditional like sluk of the spiritual education. And I found that, you know, lots of interesting projects are going on in this Istanbul, especially in this Suleymaniye. And I personally call this, you know, Saris Medrese as like an Ihya center. Like, you know, this is a center to revive all the traditions, all the sciences which exist in the older civilization. And this tea ceremony as well, that it was the part of, you know, it was the core of the Japanese tradition, like before the modernization. But unfortunately, now we are losing lots of the followers. Like, and I would think, and actually we can find lots of, like, you know, the Tasawwufi concept in also Japanese tea ceremony. So, and you know, these Muslim students, in this sense, have lots of advantage of understanding traditional Japanese culture, like much more than the, like, you know, secularized Japanese. So I found that this, you know, Istanbul is a really good opportunity to not only revive the Islamic sciences, but also like in the Japanese, like the cultures. Oh. And when it comes to the social reality, I meant technology benefit. Two. Geçebilir misiniz? Evet. This is one layer technology, so they don't accept. Anyway, so yeah, this is so like sci-fi. And he's not Malaysian, he's Japanese actually, but he likes Malaysian costumes, so he's very good. But this is my sensei in Japan. You know, he is considered as the first Japanese alim who completed PhD at Cairo University. And when I was attending his class when I was undergraduate, he saw that this nahi wa isbat, la ilaha illallah, it's not just like acquiring the Muslim identity, but actually this is sociological endeavor. That's what he said. He said the la ilaha is a process of analyzing all the politically or socially constructed realities. Here it means like illusions around us. And while in la Allah is nothing but liberation from their servitudes. He said that as the Japanese Muslim, what is important is that we are surrounded by so many illusions. Actually, it has no foundation of it. And this La ilaha is not just like the denying like Shintoism, Buddhism, and such. Right? That we are living in a modern society, and in this modern society, the like so-called religion in narrow sense is not important. What important is what kind of societies are we living in, and what kind of constructed truths are we facing, and also we must think how we can live it from there, because we must understand how we actually enslaved to those like fake realities. So actually, thinking about the Asian Islam is kind of balanced. Like first, we have to understand our context, and also what kind of illusion we're facing, and the think about the like Tawheed of Allah. And based on like it. Okay. Tamam, it's okay. And this another book is actually the this Niyaz Hoja is introduced me this book is about this is frequently quoted by the Abdul Hakim Murad Hoja. It's about the awesome the Islam. He said this Vincent Monter is the claiming that this Islamic civilization, even though they share the one prison or Tawheed, there are so many like a cultural like manifestation, like diverse cultural manifestation. And he listed like 5 this color of the Islamic civilization. One is Arab, of course, and second is Turkic. It's like the Central Asia and this Turkic area, and third is Malay, Indonesia, and fourth is Persia, India, and fifth is Africa. And I briefly read this book, but then I started thinking, where am I? Like, because I'm not African, and also I'm not Persian Indian, and also I'm not Malay. Well, sometimes when I'm walking on the street in Istanbul, people think that I'm Malay or Indonesian, but I'm not. And Turkic, ben yavaş yavaş Türk yaşıyorum ama yani etnik olarak Türk değilim. And also, and also I'm not Arab. So this is a problem of the modern Islamic scholarship that in some way, they have also installed this Western-oriented, like Orientalism within themselves. Bir sonraki sayfa geçebilir misiniz? Bu mu? Oh. Yeah, like absence of perspective of East Asia is a good example of the internalized Orientalism in Muslim scholars. Like even like me, like I never, when I was doing the PhD studies, I never think seriously about like the Islam in East Asia. Like once I moved to Istanbul, I started to think because not only the Ottoman Empire, but also the other like Mughal Empire, or what I want to say is the Muslim scholars are so well knowledgeable about the civilization, and they're sincerely working on it. And what we have, and also when it comes to this, think about the multiplex approach to the society, we must also revive this perspective towards East Asia as well. For example, the left one is called like it's a Bahr al-Hayat, This is the first illustrated book on analyzing yoga, which is written by the Muslim scholar. So actually the Muslim scholar is the first intellectual who analyzed the yoga. Like not the people in California or something, like, it was a Muslim intellectual who think seriously about, oh, this yoga as really sciences of the Indians. And right now, like when we think about the self, like even me, like Asian Muslim, we don't have this kind of, I didn't have this kind of perspective with it. But the Muslim scholar from the very start on their own history, they have this, açık medeniyet like a görüşü. Eh? Okay, tamam. Sanki burada şey. Tamam. And so I will really summarize this East Asian method towards the understanding the Chinese or Asian society is that, well, when this Muslim society was built in the Chinese Empire, they were super minority, and they have been a minority from the very beginning and until the present. So they have never been in the center of the politics. So that's why what they have to do is to prove that they are like intellectually worse for the Chinese society, but not just integrating themselves to the Chinese, but while keeping their Muslim identity, like intellectual Muslim identity, and then they have to show that this Islamic sciences is like a best version of the Chinese philosophy. And one of the main format they have used is that the tasawwuf method. That this is called nuzul and uruj. And nuzul is like in the process of position yourself by understanding ontology. So this is more like a metaphysical sciences. That what is the concept of Allah, or what is the like nature, or what is the relationship between the cause and effect. This is more like a metaphysical endeavor. And ascending like uruj is the like in spiritual education, like and Chinese scholar says that the balance between this descent and ascension, it creates a reality of each of the individual in the society. And what they have to do is to pointing out that what kind of sciences have their own method of descent ascending, and what kind of original method that Islamic sciences can produce or show to the Chinese society. Oh, and this is one of the good I found from the manuscript, that how they are trying to describe that Islam has this nuzul and uruj method according to the Chinese vocabulary. And Tafsir Hoja also mentioned about the importance of this language in the social sciences. And this is the clear historical example that how they're trying to acquire the proper vocabulary to show this Islamic method to the Chinese society. And in order to understand this Asian society, but the most important keyword is this Dao. The social science of East Asian civilization is based on this Dao philosophy. Dao means like like a path. Like it can be translated as like tariqa, it can be translated as sharia, it can be translated as hakika. It depends on the context. And Dao is the root of the world and also where it will practice. So it also have like a nuzul perspective and also has a uruj perspective. And the intellectual who believes in this minority religion like Islam in Chinese society, this Liu Zi, he's one of the most important figure of the Chinese Muslim community. He speaks to the masses with the language and arts. Arts mean here is like funun, that correspond to the reality of the majority society. So just as not like they lock themselves and try and they deny their own the majority society, but they willingly acquire the appropriate vocabulary so that they can show that they have the power of the intellectual. And this it's called Shuodao. In Japanese we call Shudo. Shudo is like refining the Dao, like completing the Dao. Complete the Dao also have two levels. Understanding this world in modern sense, like by using natural sciences or social sciences, and also it has a uruj perspective. It's like more spiritual practice, like riyada, or like in practice tasawwuf. He said that the 5 pillars of Islam are the path of perfecting the Dao, and it is a way in which heaven, here heaven means macrocosmos, and human being microcosmos reach their harmony. So he's saying that this Islam has this multiplex level. It's not only about understanding macrocosmos, it's not only about understanding microcosmos, but it actually is a balance between finding the balance between this macrocosmos and microcosmos. And also he criticized, some of the tradition or region in China, they don't have this multiplex approach. For example, some region, they only have this nuzul method. They only, deal with the like metaphysical inquiries, while the other tradition, they only have like only practice, and they don't have any philosophy behind it. So DUZ is strongly emphasized that we have this multiplex approach. That's why we are the best figure who embodies the Tao in the important keyword, the Chinese civilization. And this is not only about my academic studies, but this is, I'm also trying to embody this, Chinese tradition. For example, I found this Chinese poem from the manuscript, and I critically edition, and I asked the company in Kyoto, in Japan, and I designed this fan. So that's why I can always read this Chinese poem about talking about the multiplexity of the ball, so that I can always carry this in daily lives. So yeah, if you want to order, please contact me. But I think we can finish. Time is up. This I can finish it. Okay. So this what? Yeah. So what I want to say here is that this in Chinese is and also this Chinese Islam is not like in minority local tradition. If you look at the history, actually the Ottoman Empire and this Chinese Muslim community, they're like twins. They have the same origin, but they gain the different vocabulary when it comes to reaching a different society. For example, the Quran, which accepted a Greek tradition, is not the only way of the Islamic sciences. For example, the Quran, which observed the vocabulary of the Confucianism or the Laozi, is also the part of Islamic civilization. And this is a potential of the Marathi approach, multiplex approach, of the Islamic civilization. Okay, thank you very much for listening. And this is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Qayyum Hoja. It's very, very, very enlightening, subhanAllah, to see this kind of relationship with tasawwuf and Oriental culture, Asian, Japanese, Chinese Tao. At this point, I'd like to transition to our last and final speaker. This is perhaps the most difficult task for me because I'm tasked with the responsibility of introducing my very own teacher who has impacted my own intellectual growth for several years, for over a decade. Sheikh Amin is, I know that he probably wouldn't have liked to be introduced with a long bio, so I thought I would speak. I was thinking about how can I do this in a way that wouldn't be upsetting to him. So I thought I would speak about the tradition in which he comes from very briefly to introduce him, as well as the work and institution that he's built, in which I myself am a beneficiary of. Sheikh Amin comes from the Deobandi tradition. He studied in Darul Ulum Deoband in India as well. And the founder of Darul Ulum Deoband, for those who don't know, is Maulana Qasim, in which the institution that Sheikh Amin built is named after him. It's called Darul Qasim in the US. His first student was Sheikh Mahmoud al-Hassan. He was known as Sheikh al-Hind. The first student of Darul Ulum Deoband, Sheikh al-Hind, is also the name of the first year program at Darul Qasim because he commemorates the sort of commemoration of the first students. So this is the first batch of students coming into Darul Qasim. The student of Maulana Sheikh al-Hind was Maulana Hussein Ahmed Madani, who was the teacher of Sheikh Amin's father, Maulana Musa Qulwadiya. I say this because the closeness in proximity of his family and lineage, as well as relationship and sohbah that he has had with these intellectual giants since he was a child, has impacted his own development and his transmission of that knowledge in bringing it to the US. The Deobandi tradition and Darul Ulum established itself right after, within 10 years of colonial rule taking over India. British colonial rule started in 1857, and Darul Ulum Deoband was established in 1866. And this was a response and an establishment of houses of knowledge in which the Islamic intellectual tradition would be spread and provide an active response and the proliferation of the Islamic intellectual heritage. At Dar al-Qasim, Sheikh Amin started by himself, and now he's had a huge amount of faculty that has joined him. Sheikh Amin himself, all of the faculty are his students, and there's about 15 of them. And Sheikh Amin serves on various councils, Dar al-Qasim. People come from all over in North America and even in the Western world to consult with Dar al-Qasim with regard to policy briefs, think tanks, bioethical conversations. Dar al-Qasim is representing American Muslims and Islam in America by preparing policy briefs to be presented to the Supreme Court and beyond. So without further ado, I'd like to allow Sheikh Amin to speak for himself, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sit on. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina wa Maulana Muhammad wa barik sallam. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here to Ibn Khaldun, and especially I give thanks to Dr. Rajab. He invited me here out of his gracious heart and hospitality, mashallah. I do have one objection against Dr. Rajab, as I always do. That is, this what's wrong with just simple Islam? Why this sophisticated symposium or that? So you've invented a word which in terms of fiqh might be termed as a bid'ah, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt and we'll call it the bid'ah hasana, inshallah. When I first heard the word multiplexity, I didn't know how to spell the word. So because I couldn't spell it, I couldn't look it up. What does it mean? Then as soon as the term maratib al-wujud came, I was like, okay. So if you Islamicize certain terms, it becomes so easy, mashallah. So my presentation today is going to be about two projects. One is, as we live in the USA, in the West, we have to deal with this issue of multiplexity, but from a very secular perspective. And so there in Europe and in North America, we deal with issues like there's no absolute truth. Everything's relative. There's no moral absolute. I came all the way from Nietzsche to Foucault and all of that good stuff or bad stuff. And now we face tremendous controversies and a lot of problems within the Muslim community that they kind of conceded to the idea that there's no referee in life anymore. So they would question the existence of God. They question the authority of the Prophet ﷺ. They question the veracity of the Quran, all because there's this kind of secular multiplexity that is taught in colleges, universities, even in schools. Now they're indoctrinating, sorry to use the word, but they're indoctrinating school children as to, saying that there is no real moral here. You can be who you want, and you can do what you want, and so on. So we have a problem based on this subject, and that's why it's kind of close to our hearts, close to our minds, that we have to address this issue in real time. In our society, we live this, unfortunately. So here's the thing. I said that if you are going to go down that road of philosophy and mathematics and physics, and that is there an absolute truth or not? Okay. So I've come to a certain understanding that there's a functional definition of truth, right? And there's a real definition of truth. So in the world, we live by function. We don't really necessarily live only by abstract philosophical mathematical definitions. And that becomes very, very difficult to live. Newtonian physics is the way the world works, is the way approach the world is the way how technology works, how science works, is Newtonian physics, basically. But if you were to say that, no, Einstein's theory of relativity is much more accurate than Newtonian physics, then you might have a problem, because it won't function. You can't function with that kind of philosophical understanding of the world. This is where the practicality of Islam now comes into play. That if you want to look at the nusus in the Quran and Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ would sometimes use functional definitions instead of real definitions. There are legal definitions and there are functional definitions. And so, you know, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslim man salim al-Muslimun min lisani wa yadi. A Muslim is someone from whose hands and tongue other Muslims are safe. Now, this is a functional definition of how Muslims should behave, how they should address their civilizational values, is not a legal definition. You can't take this hadith and say, this is the definition of Islam, or this is who a Muslim is. I mean, if a Muslim hurts another Muslim, is he no longer a Muslim? Okay, now, the Khawarij and the Mu'tazili, they might take that kind of approach, but the Ahlul Sunnah never took that approach, that there's an Islahi paradigm, which I call, and there's an ilmi paradigm. Okay? So the prophets are very practical, pragmatic people. What they need, what they want to do is that you have these maratib al-wujud ontology, which the good presenters before me have explained. But here's the thing is, from the maratib, you have to go through the marahil, the phases of human existence. So the maratib help us navigate all the marahil of human existence. And that's where the idea of al-ula wal-akhirah comes into play. That from the ula, we have to get to the akhirah. But for us to understand what it takes to get from here to there, you have marahil. So along with the kind of the vertical, right, you have the horizontal too. So the Quran speaks about the horizontal as well as it speaks about the ontological and the vertical. So in the horizontal, you'll have the alim arwah, that we existed in the arwah, alastu bi rabbikum, and we existed in the mother's womb, we exist in this dunya, and then we exist in the barzakh, we exist on the day of judgment in Jannah, inshallah. So these marahil now help Muslims understand how to navigate existence as it pertains to the human being. There's existence as it pertains to Allah, that you know about and read about in, say, Fusus, right? And other Sufi traditions. But in terms of fiqh, what makes fiqh so important is that it brings the wujud of insan through the marahil into the akhirah. So when we give orientation to potential muftis in Darul Ifta, we take them through the marahil. That fiqh is not simply mundane. Fiqh is not mundane. Fiqh extends to the akhirah. And the hukum of Sharia is going to be based on whether or not there's an effect, a repercussion, or a reward in the akhirah. That's how we do fiqh. Because the first issue is whether or not it has itham. Is there sin in this action, in this issue? So there's now the philosophy that we would like to hopefully this is a collection of ideas. So from maratib all the way to the marahil. Okay? And that is human existence. There's God's existence, Allah's wujud, wahdatul wujud, whatever you like to call it, wahdatul shuhud. Doesn't matter what name you give it. But there is also that the insan, now perfection is in Jannah. Okay? I think we must not fool ourselves by assuming that this perfection is possible in this dunya. Okay. Perfection is not possible in this dunya because this is Darul Ibtila. Right? This is Darul Imtihan. That is Darul Akhirah and that is Jannah. In Jannah there is perfection, inshallah. So this is how I think we should frame our discussion around the maratib, but include the marahil with the maratib so that we have a holistic, comprehensive understanding of how the ahkam al-shara come into play and how they come into existence. I'm going to give you some examples of this in fiqh, or maybe even theology or aqaid. One is that there is an absolute truth, we know. There's Allah, the haqq. One of his names is Al-Haq, who is the absolute truth, the absolute real, the total reality. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for a Muslim, the issue is not whether there is an absolute truth. The issue is, how do we get to the Haq? Okay. And this plays at every level, I think, of Islamic discourse. So for instance, there's a book by Imam Ghazali, Faisal al-Tafriqah, in which he discusses whom you should call a kafir, whom you should not. So he gives a lot of leeway, a lot of latitude as to who you can't call a kafir. Okay. So there is haqq, and there is a gray area, and there's kufr. Right? So in the gray area, which I'm going to explain to you now, how they came up with this gray area is based on something very sophisticated, and that is called Ahlul Qibla. So you have that multiplexity, Ahlul Qibla. So the idea, the term Ahlul Qibla exists in some hadith, some riwayat, but the tabi'in, they coined the word Ahlul Qibla to include every Muslim who was basically metaphysically facing the Haqq, Kaaba, the Qibla, metaphysically, not physically. Okay? So if you face the Kaaba from one angle, you won't be facing the Kaaba from the other angle. Okay? And sometimes in Salat, if you're not in the masjid, then فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ, you can face towards the field of the Kaaba, and still your Salat will be valid. So Imam Ghazali uses that as a backdrop and says that if somebody who now is an intellectual or scholar misses the target of the Kaaba, of the metaphysical Kaaba, and he stays within the zone of the Kaaba, they call him an non-Muslim. Right? Very genius. So the Sunnis, min al-Tabi'in, they were not very quick to condemn outrightly the Mu'tazili and call them kafirs. Okay? They're very careful. This is at this level of theology and kalam. Second level is in the ahkam itself. So as you know, we have Ishtihad, we have four madhab, and they're all mujtahidun. So in Ishtihad, the Prophet ﷺ allowed mistakes. Yeah. One, you have multiplexity, where everything has to be functional, and then multiplexity, which is this legal pluralism, that al-mujtahidu yukhti'u wa yusib. A mujtahid may make a mistake and he may be correct. But then he said, based on the akhirah, that if he makes a mistake, he will have one ajr. See, the ruling is based on the marahil, not just the dunya. It's not secular, it's not mundane. The ruling of ijtihad means that if a mujtahid makes ijtihad and makes a mistake, falahu ajrun, he has at least one ajr. And if somebody has ajr, you can't call him wrong. How can somebody who's ma'jur be now somebody who's wrong? And that's the point for us against the Shias, for the Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, that they're all maghfur, they're all in Jannah according to Nas. If somebody's already in Jannah, why are we condemning them? Okay? So now, mistakes do happen because that's human life. That's reality. So the mujtahidun took on the responsibility of understanding the role of ijtihad. At the same time, the Prophet ﷺ gave them motivation to actually do the work. So when you do the work and you have ijtihad, meaning bazlul juhd, that you're exerting yourself intellectually, you're hitting the books, you're burning the midnight oil, and you're coming down and you're making a ruling based on your best judgment, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you ajr, even if you make a mistake. And if you're correct, falahu ajran, you have two rewards, mashallah. So this is not the marahil in ijtihad. So one marhala of ijtihad is khata'i, and the other marhala in ijtihad is now sawabi. That is correct. So somebody came, asked me about ijtihad, and said, hal al-ijtihad yatajazza'u? That can you say that ijtihad is now partial? Meaning, is there correct ijtihad and there's an incorrect ijtihad? I said, yes, now. يتجزأ إلى الخطأ والصواب. It divides itself into khata and to sawab. This is by nas of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is what made the Muslim civilization so unique, that first and foremost, see, if Imam Abu Hanifa is looking at the Kaaba from this angle, and Imam Shafi is looking at the Kaaba from the other angle, they're both hitting the Kaaba. And if Malik's looking from this angle, Imam Ahmad's looking from this angle, that's from the Kaaba, they're looking at the Kaaba so that they have the wijha. Okay, so the Quran uses this in favor of developing a community of Muslims who are active. So the Quran says, وَلِكُلٍّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Everybody has an angle. Everybody has a point of view. So now the issue is not whether you should bicker about the differences. The issue is فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Now compete in good deeds. So you can use your opinions and prompt yourselves, motivate yourselves to do good deeds instead of being stuck in the, excuse the language, cesspit of fighting and bickering over the khilafat. And this is what I think Muslim governments did in the past and hopefully even now, inshallah, that they will use the Ishtihad of the Mujtahid and propel the Ummah towards a better life and a better, inshallah, akhirah. And this now wijha. Is now everybody has a point of view. Okay? But in Islam, as opposed to secularism, in secularism, especially in the West today, there is no truth. But in Islam, there is a truth. What is truth? The truth is what Allah says, what the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. That is the haqq. Based on your five senses, based on your aql salim, and based on your khabr sadiq and wahi, you will get to the truth. If you don't have the means by which you can get to the truth, then you must follow somebody, otherwise known as taqleed. That's why taqleed is such a great rahmah for the ummah, that you don't have to bend over backwards on every issue and then, Google and study and, study 10 books of hadith for you to get the answer. It's very simple. Life is very pragmatic, it's very practical. You go to somebody who knows and he'll give you the answer. And that is the way that Muslims have operated in their civilization. So this is one issue. Another issue is that we have at Dar al-Qasim a theory and a difference between the oral tradition and the written tradition. Okay? And this is the basis of our philosophy at Dar al-Qasim. The oral tradition is when Islam was crystallized. So at that time, the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, there were no written works, very few. We did not need books in order to preserve our deen, because that is the way of Ahlul Kitab. Ahlul Kitab are called Ahlul Kitab because they use the book to preserve their deen. But alhamdulillah, because our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Nabiul Ummi. He's an Ummi Nabi. He did not need books and pen and paper to preserve and practice and show the deen. Nor did the Sahaba. And nor did the Tabi'in. And that's very clear in our practice today. I always give the example that when, mashallah, our mothers showed us how to make wudu, they didn't have Bukhari in one hand and Muslim in the other hand. They just showed us, this is how you make wudu. And if you made a mistake, you probably go to, you get a slap, right? That's the oral tradition. So the practice of deen was established through the oral tradition. Then came the period of documentation. Imam Malik came, and Imam Shafi came, Imam Ahmad came, and all these people, Imam Muhammad came and documented all the ahkam of Abu Hanifa, and that's the written tradition. So now, what we have today is both the oral tradition and the written tradition. And you see, the genius of the oral tradition is that it allows for so much creativity, so much creativity. For instance, if you there are discussions today in Western philosophy and language as to whether language is real or not. There are problems with anything that's real. They don't want anything to be real because they live in falsehood. And the Quran tells us that. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ. Those who disbelieve, their actions are like a mirage. They don't want the truth. They want to live in a delusion. And that's where they live. They live in delusions, illusions all the time, so they can never acknowledge any truth. When you look at the Quran and you look at the Arabic language, the simplicity of the Arabic language, for those of you, mashallah, who are studying, who have studied, is that look at the word Bismillah. Just to give you an example. Bismillah, you know that it means in the name of Allah. But there's no verb there. There's no mutallaq in Arabic. There's no verb. What's the verb there? Bismillah. So is that we leave it to the imagination of the reader, which creates creativity. So you can say, Bismillah, I begin with the name of Allah, abtadi'u, or you can say, aqra'u, I read in the name of Allah, or you can say, atabarraku, I'm seeking barakah through the name of Allah. Or you can say, asta'inu, I'm seeking help through the name of Allah. So you see that there's multiplexity and the genius of the Arabic language, that it just creates a very creative mind. And as you know, in order to be an alim, you need to know Arabic, right? So right from the word go, you're in this creative kind of greenhouse that you're forced to be creative. Likewise, alhamdulillah. Now, there's no verb there between alhamdulillah, praise for Allah. What does that mean? So in the English language, you have to put the word is, which is a verb. But in Arabic, it could be a number of things. It could be multiple mutallaqat. It could be that alhamdu yani thabitun lillah, walhamdu wasfun lillah, walhamdu milkun lillah. It could be any number of things. So when we teach students sarf and nahu, we bring out the complexity, the sophistication, and the genius of the multiple ways you can look at any one ayah. Multiple ways. And that is the beauty of tafsir. But what happened was that the Sahaba, through their genius, they were able to establish the aqaid and left us the tradition of aqaid, so that the aqaid will be the truth, because they are qati, and fiqh, most of it is dhanni. So for life to function, again, the word function, life to function, we had ikhtilafat. We had multiplexity. We had multiple opinions on any one given issue. They say in the issue of salat, there are 30,000 ikhtilafat. That's what the ulama say. That just in the issue of salat as an institution, there are 30,000 ikhtilafat that are documented. And Allah knows how many are not documented. So I think I commend you, mashallah, for this great step towards helping us and helping the Muslim community understand the maratib al-wujud. But I would humbly request you to add to it the marahil. Maratib are there as a function to help us traverse all the marahil so that we end up in Jannah, inshallah. Bi-idhnillah. Jazakumullah.
At this time, we have, I know the time is, we have the oral tradition and the written tradition, right? So the written tradition was that we would start at 10 a.m. and finish at 12. We started a little bit later as per the oral tradition, and we'll continue for another, let's say until 12:15. I've already requested permission from the organizers to extend us to 12:15, if that's okay. So we'll open the floor to any questions, comments, concerns of the audience. Those who are online, please write them in the chat, inshallah, and they'll be conveyed to us, and we'll ask them of the panelists. Please specify whom you are asking your question to. Yes, Professor Hiba.
Okay, Bismillah. I will be addressing Professor Alp Arsalan. I've been thinking about وما تحت الثرى. وما تحت الثرى. And it only came in the Quran once. I always check the Al-Mu'jam, so I see how many times and in which meaning a specific word and the roots and the different other words that, you know, share the same in a different order. They all have some type of a relation. And actually, I was thinking about 4 things that are تحت الثرى. You know, النبات والأموات والخيرات and السحر. Because usually sihr is put under the surface for a reason, yani, that many shuyukh have been thinking about, especially in graves, you know, in where they assume that there would be like قوة سفلية or something like that. So actually تحت الثرى can be thought in different ways, and the different layers of what is meant by تحت الثرى, the surface that is what is under the surface on the minimal level, and also what is under the surface till the core of the earth itself and the geological etc. So I was just reflecting. There are so many things that you said that can be thought about in different ways. Thank you very much.
on the ontological aspects. So that is why I didn't discuss many other things, many other verses, in fact, would be related. It would be even more interesting, actually, if we can develop this, and we'll probably come to the concept of the marahil also, as Ustaz is discussing. So thank you very much. That is another interesting point. Obviously, that refers to the multi-structure of the Shahada at the same time. And I think whenever the term Ard is used, we should not understand only the earth. It's probably more general, referring to the Shahada, in general. And the Samawat is, of course, physical also. So then we have to be careful whether it is the physical or the non-physical, because both are covered like that. So that means we need to do more, study to discover and, provide more interpretation for these concepts. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Sheikh Amin has a comment as well.
Muslim theologians about that. There's an ayah in the Quran. وَهُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمِنَ الْأَرْضِ مِثْلَهُنَّ at the end of Surah Talaq. So there's a discussion from a riwayah from Ibn Abbas, that Ibn Abbas said that the Prophet ﷺ is Khatamun Nabiyyin in every earth, based on that ayah. So there's a discussion there. Is not primary level Aqidah. Maybe it's tertiary level, is just the research issue. But there is something to that. Yeah.
There is one more thing. I just remember, I think some of the Mufassirun, they refer to this, according to the rules of Balagha, when you mention two things in parallel fashion, they both should be either singular or plural. But Ard wa Samawat is not like that. So it's like, one is singular, but equal to something that is plural. So that is the emphasis to put, the significance on the Ard.
On the side, Arnold.
Yeah, I have an hour. Yeah, I think that there are some, as you know, the Sufi have very sophisticated literature on this, that is that without going into the concept wahdatul adyan, pluralism. We don't believe in that, nor did the Sufis. But there is some justification for the misguidance of other people. Because if Islam was one from Adam and Noah, then the dalala, the aberration, must have come at the expense of the haqq. But there must be some element of the haqq still there. So that's why I think that the Sufi tradition would help you the most there, as to trying to give some justification for different religions and different rituals and practices and so on. But they won't concede the idea that they are what do you call it, naji, that they have salvation. They might concede that they do have, so even that kind of seep down into Islamic law, right? That you have minorities living in the Muslim Khilafah, that we never killed people because they were of a different religion. Okay, Muslims ruled in India with about 13% minority. They didn't kill the Hindus. They let them be, and that is because they allow them to be the way that they want to worship Allah. And the Quran speaks of this, that you can't destroy synagogues and churches and temples and masajid, because that's not the way we are. So that's also kind of religious multiplexity, that but we don't need to concede najat, that we can keep our aqidah where it is and say that they do have maybe some elements of the truth. So definitely the moral ethics, if they're universal, they'll overlap. Okay? So based on that, you can create a system of living where you can accommodate so many different types of people, so many different types of religions, which is what Islam did. Yeah.
I'm just going to restate the question upon a request, because the people online are not able to hear the question because of the mics. The question was comparative religion. Rosenthal, for example, cited as able to speak about Muslims by withholding judgment, and invents comparative religion is to withhold judgment on other religions, versus comparative theology is to kind of deal with those constructs that you're actually that are being presented by another religion. And so is there a notion of some notion of comparative religion where you engage with an alternative discourse by withholding judgment? And that was a question that Sheikh Amin had answered. Did I capture your question accurately? Oh, more or less. Okay.
So you're asking the place of comparative religion in the traditional Islamic sciences. Is that what your question is? No, you place.
The idea was that that in the way that because it is distinguished, it has different levels of it. It also has a different way of distance and nearness between other sciences and also culture or religion.
Okay.
So, religion as an element has more distance towards the other, and for example, compared theology, which is more closest to judgment.
Thank you very much. Actually, I remember when I was a student, undergrad students, I also asked the same question to my sensei, Professor Hassan. And he introduced one, the surah of the Quran, the Lakum Dinakum Waliya Din. And it has a really clear answer to the comparative religion, because he's saying that while the word religion, the opposite word of religion is heretics. So actually the cognitionally, this Western science didn't recognize they're showing that they look like they're doing objectively. Actually, there is no objective comparative studies of religion, because religion itself is a value judgmental order. Yeah. But here in the Quran, it says "Lakum dinakum waliya din." Even though they don't believe Islam, they have their own din. So that's why first of all, thinking about the language is really crucial for us. This, because the language is key to understand how this Islamic sciences have this kind of like an open perspective, towards the other tradition. And in the case of Asia, now they use the word called shukyo, and this word means religion, but this was invented during the modernization. We didn't have this concept, before modernization. So the word religion came to Japan, and they created the new Chinese character, and the other China and Korea and Vietnam, they installed this concept. So this is how they, their worldview has changed. But before the modernization, the most important for them is that who is the exemplar of the philosophy, and what is the practice to reach the truth. Because in Islam, the first thing that the Muslim scholar introduced is the Prophet, the Prophet Muhammad. He said that he is the perfect exemplar of the Tao, and then and the Islamic scholar explained what kind of practices, how the Islamic practices are the complete version of the acquiring the balance between this nuzul and the uruj. That's why, sometimes we naively use the, so-called, terminology which came from, this in modern sciences. But actually, there are so many hidden, value-oriented or judgmental word behind it. So that's why, we always critically understand what the historical, historical background of each word, and also and as the other professor also said, that we must cherish the deepness or the multiplexiness of the Arabic languages. That actually, not the works of the Islamic scholar, but our Quran and Hadith itself is already have this. How can I say? What I mean is more like an objective perspective, towards the other community.
Tahsin, which is also on the line, I want to acknowledge his presence. Let's see if he has any comments or anything that he'd like to add to any of the questions that have been asked so far. Tahsin hocam orada mısınız?
Güven Hoca size söz veriyor. İlave etmek istediğiniz bir şey var mı diye.
Buradayım tabii, dinliyorum. Var mı soru? Herhangi bir soru gelmedi. Duyamadım yani.
Oturumu bitirmeden önce sizin ilave etmek istediğiniz bir şey var mı hocam?
Duyamıyorum maalesef.
Hocam sizin ilave eden bir şeyiniz var mıdır?
Benim mi? Tamam. Hayır, ilave edeceğim şu anda bir şey yok. Herkese teşekkür ediyorum.
Sağ olsun, biz de teşekkür ederiz. Allah razı olsun. We have a question on the side.
Presentations. I have the question from Professor Yamato and from the other professor, but he left, so just okay. Because as far as I know, Toshihiko Izotsu also has some similar approach to comparing, Eastern Asian approach to spirituality, religion with Islamic one. Mm-hmm. And because he was Japanese, but he was doing Islamic philosophy in Iranian Institute of Philosophy just before the revolution. So, and also Dariush Shaigan is another Iranian scholar who, especially before the Iranian Revolution, have this approach of, because he was particularly interested in Indian approach to religion, also Zen Buddhism, and comparing to Islamic. How do you view the works of these two scholars, if you have any idea?
He is one of the great visionary from Japan. His translation of Quran is still useful for us. But his approach to religion is interesting, but something is questionable, I think, because he tried to build so-called meta religion of the Eastern tradition, and that that approach was appealing to the so-called like perennial society, like perennialist society. And it's interesting, but when we look at all of the works of Professor Toshiko, I read all of his books, but he didn't mention any about like an actual society, Muslim society, or the actual perspective of society. For example, he was living in Iran and he experienced the Iran Revolution, but he didn't say anything about it. It seemed like, he was just, his philosophy is just like his Oriental philosophy, like, it just on his mind. But he, I'm not criticizing, by the way, I really love Toshiko, but he didn't notice how the dynamism of the Muslim society itself, and how actually those Muslim scholars are trying to apply these sciences to change the society. So in this sense, like academically, you love it. I really love him. But I think, that I started questioning myself lately that, how maybe like in order to understand, like, especially the Muslim in Asia, like we need a different approach. And I believe that traditional Islamic scholar in Asia has more like, the appealing method, for us, to understand not only the Muslim, but also, ourselves.
Question from Professor. Is that, you just skipped that part, but about Mullah Sadra, because I think the Mullah Sadra has a lot to say about this maratib and his idea of tashkik wujud and etc. And there are some even scholars in Iran who have tried to connect somehow his theory, his approach to ontology with modern sciences. I agree with you, but also to use it as a basis for social science. But can you just elaborate further on what your view of Muslim race? Thank you.
The question is for Alp-Arslan Hujan, and the question is for those who are online viewing, that for him to elaborate on Mullah Sadra's perspectives on science and social sciences as well. And this will be the last question that we've taken, inshallah, and we'll break after this.
Well, Mullah Sadra's complete philosophical system is based totally on maratib, because his famous theory, tashkik al-wujud. So this whole tashkik, depends on the systematic descending from the wujud, that is wujud mutlaq, and gradually wujud munbasit and so on, coming all the way to this level. But he doesn't stop there. You see, this is the thing, maybe that's the implication, because if the physical universe has this maratib, obviously human beings and human society will definitely have this maratib also. And in Iqazun Na'imin, that is what I quoted actually, that he gave, is like over there he gives, of course, the five maratib for the human beings, which is reflected on the society also, and he tries to analyze it all from this perspective. So it is completely based on this notion of understanding. It's extremely very original, this whole thing, both ontological, epistemological, cosmological, sociological as well. And of course, when we refer to the human beings, also anthropological at the same time.
And Sheikh Amin had a final comment as well.
Well, another maybe important point, which we didn't have time to discuss, I'm sure they would have if they had the time, was, defining what the human being is. How do you define the human being? And does the human being, does he have phases and marahil and maratib in himself? The Quran does say, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Right? We should look into ourselves and see who we are, what we are. And that's the premise of, I think, Ghazalian theory is all about man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. So I think that's another perspective, talking about multiplexity. Another perspective is to understand what is the human being. I mean, this is a human subject also. So.
That's actually the perfect segue to and perfect conclusion to this panel. Yes. So we'll end here. I want to thank all of the panelists for joining and spending the time and expending their intellectual and spiritual energies to enlighten all of us. Also the viewers for sitting very attentively, engaging and asking very good questions, both online and in person. We'll be coming back at 12 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, inshallah, in the afternoon, after lunch and Dhuhr, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.